Content warning, this episode is all about a far-right extremist group in case you couldn't tell from the title, so if you're sensitive to discussions about violence or hate speech, this might be a difficult watch for you. Fascists. We talk a lot about them on the left. They're the biggest assholes in the world, and we tend to paint them with kind of a broad brush. We tend to think of fascists as all thinking the same, behaving the same, and more or less being simple to recognize. Ironically, however, given the fascist tendency to despise diversity, there's a wide-ranging diversity of thought among different fascist groups. If we expect all fascists to act alike, that allows fascists that act differently to operate unnoticed. Welcome to Know Your Fash, where we take a closer look at a specific group of fascists to see what makes them goose step. It's my hope that by shining a light on these creeps, we can understand how they think and operate a little better, so that we're more equipped to fight them and anyone else they inspire. To put it simply, fascism is authoritarian and xenophobic paleo-ultranationalism. That's a lot of highfalutin words to throw at you, so let me just explain it even simpler. A fascist believes the following. Their national, ethnic, or racial identity is superior to all others. At one point, their national or religious group was at the height of its power and are now in decline due to corrupting degenerative influences. Therefore, in order to regain their power, they must return to the old ways. The world is a stage of perpetual conflict in which the strong destroy the weak. Therefore, strong and usually dictatorial leadership is needed to return their society to its full glory. Now, these aren't the only things a fascist might believe. These are just the bare-bones criteria I'm using here to explain who I consider to be a fascist. I bring up my definition ahead of time because often when you discuss fascists on the internet, people will get really weird about it and accuse you of calling anyone you dislike a Nazi. Or they'll be like, who gets to decide who is or is not a fascist? I don't know. I don't have any legal ability to declare someone a fascist. I can only give you what I think a fascist is and why I think a group meets that definition. And I'm doing this in the spirit of good faith. Though I find fascism contemptible, I'm not using it in a derogatory sense. I'm using it in a descriptive sense. I'm not calling these people fascists because I disagree with them. I disagree with them because I think they're fascists. And I'm not speaking colorfully. I'm not exaggerating to make a point. Nor am I accusing anyone of secretly and deliberately emulating Hitler or Mussolini. They just meet the criteria that I outlined. Something else to keep in mind, fascists will lie about what they believe. They'll tell whoever they're speaking to whatever story makes them appear most sympathetic and reasonable. Often, they'll claim to be tolerant and nonviolent, lovey-dovey types, but their actions will often contradict this, which is why you can't just listen to what they say, you have to look at what they do. So with those disclaimers out of the way, let's move on to today's subject, the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys are the brainchild of Vice magazine co-founder Gavin McInnes, which perhaps explains the embarrassing hipster bullshit that permeates the whole organization. They're called the Proud Boys as an allusion to a song from Disney's Aladdin, Proud of Your Boy, which is ironic given how much the Proud Boys hate Muslims. Like Aladdin. They have a little uniform, a black Fred Perry polo shirt with yellow piping. Their initiation rituals include getting beaten up while reciting the names of breakfast cereals.
Cheerios! One! Wheaties! Two! Crispies! Three! Trix! Four! One total crunch!
They're strongly discouraged from jerking off and have weird prescriptive beliefs about how and when masturbating is acceptable. I'm not kidding when I say their rules include the idea that if a man is to nut, it must be within 1 yard of a woman. I cannot stress enough that none of this is a joke I'm making at their expense. The nut rules, the cereal thing, even the way Gavin McInnes dresses like a Victorian barber are all entirely sincere. And I want to pause here, because hearing this, it's easy to think of these guys as frivolous. These rules sound funny and quirky and maybe bro-ish, but ultimately harmless. And a lot of that is very deliberate. They want you to think that they're just goofy oddballs. This is a tactic a lot of the far-right uses in their public-facing communication. Have you ever wondered why the Klan uses such silly names for its leadership structures, calling people Grand Wizards or Imperial Cyclopses or lopsided Jabberwockies or whatever? They did that at the time so that the Klan's formation could be written off as a joke, you know, and it just kind of stuck around through inertia. This Schrodinger's joke strategy lets you say whatever you want and then decide later, after people have had a chance to react, whether or not you actually meant it. It creates a malleable truth that keeps those who practice it from ever having to answer for the things that they say. The Proud Boys are a Western chauvinist club for men, with chapters in the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. They don't use the word chauvinist to mean to be disdainful of women, though, to be clear, they certainly are, and they think women are lazy, less intelligent, and should be subservient to men. They use it in the sense of feeling or displaying aggressive or exaggerated patriotism towards, quote, Western culture. As they are fond of saying, they believe that West is best. You might say that they consider their national, ethnic, or religious identity superior. They claim to be conservative libertarians, but paradoxically seem to fucking love Donald Trump, the police and military. Officially, the Proud Boys do not describe themselves as a white supremacist or white nationalist organization. They allow membership to men of color, for example, so long as they will admit that white people aren't the problem. In fact, the Proud Boys split with the alt-right, which they initially considered themselves to be an explicit part of, was framed around the group's focus on race rather than Western values, which, you know, is just a wishy-washy way of saying white people stuff. Now, perhaps some of the less savvy Proud Boys actually believe that this is a distinction worth noting. But it seems to me it's pretty obvious that the Proud Boys' outward condemnation of white supremacy is a marketing tactic, a way to repackage white nationalist talking points to people who might find them objectionable if stated too directly. It's just public relations. You know, they're founded by a guy who's pretty good at marketing. Despite their insistence that they're definitely not a hate group, no siree Bob, they do seem very comfortable associating with virtually every far-right group on the planet, up to and including neo-Nazis and the Klan. And a Proud Boy helped organize the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. You remember that? The Nazi rally for Nazis? And he went on Gavin McInnes's podcast to promote it. And Gavin McInnes encouraged people to go, but not to wear their little Proud Boy polo shirts. And then, later, after it became clear that everybody knew that it was a Nazi thing, a Nazi rally for Nazis, they kicked that guy out of the Proud Boys, said he was never really a Proud Boy, and said anybody who went to the rally would be disavowed. But now, the guy who runs the organization admits that he himself went to the rally, so I don't know. Seems like they're willing to adapt what they claim to stand for based on where the wind is blowing. It's also worth noting that the announcement of the creation of the Proud Boys was in Talkies magazine. Not a magazine for the trashy snack food. It's a publication that's hosted articles from the likes of Richard Spencer and Jared Taylor. And Gavin McInnes, the guy who started the whole thing but eventually distanced himself from the organization once the legal consequences were made clear to him, is definitely, categorically a white supremacist. He believes in biological IQ disparities between races. Here's a piece he wrote for the publication American Renaissance, where he was cited as one of the, quote, race realists invited to imagine the future of American race relations. Also invited, Richard Spencer, Jared Taylor, and Paul Gottfried, the guy who literally coined the term alt-right. I don't dislike minorities, I hate white liberals. And the good news is, their days are numbered. The myth of diversity as our strength is contingent on nobody trying it. When we're all forced to live side by side, we'll quickly realize we are incompatible and agree to disagree. The blind utopians at the New York Times will be crushed, and the rest of us realists will be dancing in the streets. The white liberal ethos tells us blacks aren't at MIT because of racism. They say blacks dominate the prison population for the same reason. They insist America is a racist hellhole where people of color, in scare quotes, have no future. This does way more damage to black youth than the KKK. When you strip people of culpability for what the fuck are you talking about, and tell them the odds are stacked against them, they don't feel like trying. White liberals make this worse by then using affirmative action to correct society's mistakes. When blacks are forced into schools they aren't qualified for, they have no choice but to drop out. Instead of going back a step to a school they can handle, they tend to give up on higher education entirely. Thanks to the Marxist myth of ubiquitous equality, this mismatch leaves blacks less educated than they would have been had they been left to their own devices. So just a couple things to note there. First, holy shit, that's one of the most racist paragraphs I've ever read in my life. Second of all, when far-right guys say that, oh, no, we're not racist, we're just anti-communist or anti-Marxist, you should pick up on the secret code where they believe that the idea that the races are equal is itself a Marxist idea. That's not to say that everybody who's anti-communist or anti-Marxist is necessarily racist, but racists definitely use it as a way to disguise their hateful beliefs. And I hope I don't have to explain to anyone in my audience, or anyone who's here for the first time, that the idea that black people don't make it into higher education as often as white people because their inferior minds just can't handle it might be just a scooch prejudice, just a little. And I know that he thinks black people are, in general, less intelligent than white people because in the very same article, he defends Charles Murray's discredited racist tome, The Bell Curve, with quite possibly the most bad faith interpretation of statistics I have ever seen. Quote, "A common misconception of the book is that it purported blacks are stupid and we are all incompatible." And I just want to pause here and point out that the whole point of this article is literally about how white people and black people are incompatible and black people are stupid. Like, it opens with a story about how black people and white people just naturally don't want to hang out together. And he says that, like, black people don't make it into college because they're dummies. So weird that he's being defensive about people making those claims about Charles Murray. Instead, the book makes it quite clear you have to start with a blank slate when you meet someone because it's quite possible he will not fit the stereotype. Doesn't mention there it's a stereotype that Murray creates. There's a giant overlap on IQ tests, and thousands of Asians are dumber than thousands of blacks. And thousands of blacks are smarter than thousands of Asians. You'd be a fool to assume you weren't dealing with one of those 1,000 from these groups. In that sense, it's an anti-racist book. All of this is written directly above a diagram allegedly demonstrating the bell curve maps of the IQ of various races. And okay, yes, Gavin, you're right that the book doesn't argue that literally every black person is dumber than every white person or East Asian person. It argues that, in general, black people are dumber than white people and East Asian people, even if Murray thinks it would be hasty to make assumptions about individuals based on that trend. McGinnis is essentially arguing that this book can't be racist because it allows for the possibility that any individual minority might be one of the good ones. And if you think I'm taking him out of context, you can read the whole article in the description below. But you don't really need to because I've read most of it here in this video. There's not really any exculpatory context there, but feel free to check it out if you don't believe me. McGinnis is also wildly Islamophobic, and I don't even need to prove that one, he just straight up admits it.
I'm not a fan of Islam. I think it's fair to call me Islamophobic.
Got me there, guys! I'm an Islamophobe. What can I say? Don't like Muslims. But for the record, I can prove it. He argues that Muslims are inbred, violent monster people, giving examples of how Muslims in Middle Eastern despotic theocracies oppress women and throw gay dudes off of buildings, evidently failing to note that those women and gay dudes are also themselves Muslim. He seems to think that, like, all Muslims in the West are sleeper agents lying in wait to enact Sharia law. When in fact, and I have this on pretty good authority actually, Muslims are normal people that have a different religion. Weird how he doesn't judge all Christians by the dominionist fundamentalists arguing we should stone gay people and force women back into the kitchen. Probably because those people are his buddies. Probably more than a few of them are Proud Boys. Moving on, hey, remember this guy, Kyle Chapman, the so-called based stick man? Boy, it's just, we have to take all of these people seriously. The guy who dressed in silly cosplay and beat the shit out of anti-fascist activists with a big stick he had? That guy, who's also an explicit white nationalist, by the way, alongside August Invictus.
Hey everybody, this is Editing Matthew from the future. Just wanted to let you know that I did call this guy August Invictus when his name is actually Augustus Invictus. So I'm going to keep calling him that throughout the video, but that's not his name, it's Augustus.
A Holocaust-denying proponent of eugenics who, actually look, before I try to explain who this guy is, let me just quote from the Proud Boys article in the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. McGinnis welcomed Invictus onto his show on July 28, 2017, where the conversation repeatedly dipped into Invictus's interest in armed revolution. He explained he'd fallen out with his fellow attorneys because they took offense to his suggestions that maybe lawyers should be hanged in a revolution. Yeah, I wonder why they took that to heart. People are so sensitive these days, you can't even tell them that you want to hang them in an armed revolution without them getting uppity. With regard to journalists, he continued, I'll tell them, you're the first ones that are going to be hanging from a lamppost in the event of a revolution. McGinnis only nodded along and in response offered up his own frustrations with liberal journalists. Now, in case you didn't catch that, he's invoking the Turner Diaries here. I made a video about that you can go watch if you're unfamiliar, but he's alluding to a part of the book where in the midst of a white nationalist exterminationist revolution, race traitors are killed en masse in the Day of the Rope, so called because they're all hanged from lampposts. Then comes the Day of the Rope, where they round up all race traitors and hang them. Race traitors are everyone who is married outside of their race, been too supportive of people outside of their race, or, just sold a home to someone outside of their race, or just random people they find on the street, because as the book notes, it's kind of impossible to avoid hanging some innocent people, but that's just something you gotta do. Turner opines that for political terror to be effective, it has to be arbitrary to keep people afraid that they could be the next victim. Also, by the way, the Proud Boys lawyer, James Van Dyke, who issued a cease and desist letter to the Southern Poverty Law Center over this article, claiming that the Proud Boys do not now, nor have they ever espoused white nationalist, white supremacist, anti-Semitic, or alt-right views, was also a big fan of the Turner Diaries, as police discovered when they raided his college dorm, because at the time he was part of a racist skinhead group, and found a copy of the Turner Diaries and a copy of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Anyway, I'm getting off track here with all the coincidences that just keep piling up. My point was that these two guys, Kyle Chapman and August Invictus, were given the explicit blessing of Gavin McGinnis to create a paramilitary wing of the Proud Boys called the Fraternal Order of Alt Knights. Or fuck me. And I gotta tell you, I don't really know what the difference is between the paramilitary wing and the regular Proud Boys, because violence is already a key aspect of the Proud Boys' worldview and praxis. There are 4 levels of Proud Boy initiation, with 4 tasks to be completed, like in a video game. 2 of them require violence. Number 1, declare yourself a Proud Boy and say the words, I am a Western chauvinist and I refuse to apologize for creating the modern world. Number 2, get the shit kicked out of you while reciting the names of 5 breakfast cereals in order to prove you don't get flustered in a fight because of how much fighting you're going to have to do, because they love to fight. They're fighting all the time. Number 3, get the hipster-ass Proud Boy tattoo with the goofy Ed Hardy-ass font. And 4, get into a fight with an anti-fascist activist or somebody else at a rally or get arrested or something. It's wishy-washy. They just say you have to make a sacrifice, and those are the examples they go with. Which may explain why virtually anywhere hate speech is being spoken to a crowd, the Proud Boys show up to provide free security. Everyone from Patriot Prayer to Identity Europa to Pegida, all of them can count on the Proud Boys to show up and pick a fight with counter-protesters. I've personally watched them circle around disabled activists like vultures, waiting for them to be alone and undefended. They're the only fascists I've ever met in my life where I've thought to myself, oh shit, I am about to get my ass kicked for real. Thankfully though, in those situations I was surrounded by tougher people who they didn't want to fuck with. Had it been just me, they absolutely would have just kicked my ass. They also have a habit of doxing and threatening online critics. You know Vic Berger, the guy who makes surrealist edits of political figures? He made a video criticizing Gavin McGinnis by showing the things that Gavin McGinnis says.
This is not wrong, big fucking Z Kyle.
And then he was sent an internal document from an anonymous tipster that alluded to threatening Berger and his relatives. Quote, let's get the social media profiles, phone numbers, and addresses for their bosses, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, boyfriends, friends, and get to work. Let's show them there are consequences. End quote. Weeks later, one of them showed up to his doorstep, told him his videos were hurting the Proud Boys and he needed to stop. So just, if I mysteriously disappear in the next few weeks, you know why. Just kidding. I'm irrelevant. I hope. So just to sum up here, in case anyone is having trouble putting this complicated web of fascist bullshit together, the Proud Boys were founded by an avowed race realist and Islamophobe, constantly hobnobs with white nationalist groups, including the Klan, welcomed with open arms the guy who planned the Unite the Right rally until it became politically inconvenient, is staffed by people with intimate knowledge of racist extremist literature for some reason, whose paramilitary wing, founded and led by a violent white nationalist criminal, literally named themselves after the alt-right, expects us to believe that they're not in any way racist or associated with the alt-right. And given all of this, given the enormous body of proof demonstrating that they are indeed a white nationalist alt-right aligned group, or at least a group sympathetic to those interests, one would have to ask, why hide it? Why maintain this implausible deniability? This is one of the preferred strategies of the far right, entryism. You change your messaging in public to downplay your more extreme beliefs in the hopes of attracting moderates. In some cases, you can use dog whistles to signal to other people more in the know what you really mean, without turning away people who are, as of yet, not sufficiently radicalized to accept your more unorthodox positions. This is why a lot of alt-righters put such an emphasis on dressing respectably and hiding their power levels. Jesus Christ, these people are so embarrassing. Entryism isn't specific to the far right by any means. Anyone might do it. The far right, the far left, religious groups, salespeople, people who want you to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In fact, I put on a dress shirt and glasses because I thought this was an important subject and I wanted to appear like a smart guy. But the far right love it because it gives them access to spaces that they would be denied if they were honest with potential recruits. That's why they lie so much. It's not just because they're bad, duplicitous people, though obviously that's a part of it. It's a tactical concern. They know that most people are vehemently against ideas like white supremacy or outward expressions of hate. Except against Muslims, which, depressingly, it seems you don't even need to hide that. And even if someone is totally on board with racism, thinks racism is the bee's knees, they also know that there's a social cost to admitting it out loud. You could lose friends, you could lose loved ones, you could lose your job, you could be kicked out of your church, who knows? But if you can just sow that little bit of doubt, everyone will be willing to look the other way, no matter how much evidence keeps piling up. Don't believe me? Read the comments to this video and see all the credulous weirdos who post shit like, "Lol, imagine thinking the Proud Boys are fascist," or "Proud Boys aren't fascist, anti-fascists are fascist." I've gotten this mocking, scandalized reaction to virtually every far-right figure or group I've ever talked about. No amount of evidence is sufficient to demonstrate that a person or group is fascist to some people if they just insist that they're not. No matter how racist, no matter how popular, people will tell you, oh, the alt-right doesn't like those guys. If you spent any time around the alt-right, they tell you they hate that guy. And the thing you have to understand is that there's no singular body of alt-right which can be neatly divided from the rest of the political spectrum. There are multiple groups of alt-right types who all have exhausting beefs with one another and all pretend to disavow the actions of the others to present themselves as the reasonable middle ground between all-out neo-Nazis and normal, boring, non-genocidal conservatives. I can see how people might think this way about some of the more mainstream alt-right figureheads, like Jordan Peterson, but it seems to also happen with guys like Stone Toss or Sargon or even fucking Richard Spencer, the guy who invented the alt-right, and it baffles me how naive people can be about this subject. The Proud Boys are a decentralized organization of fascist thugs committed to violence in the streets against their political enemies, critics, politicians, and whichever minority groups they're scapegoating at the time. There is a worrying historical precedent for this: the brown shirts. While the Proud Boys are deeply pathetic and some of their beliefs and practices are laughable, it's a deadly mistake to not recognize the very real danger that they pose. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go jerk off because nobody's stopping me. One of the benefits of not being a fascio, complete freedom over jerking off. At your leisure. Not like on the bus, but when you're home by yourself, go for it. Cool ending to that video I just did. I'm not gonna do an eyeball zone this week, everybody, because this type of video tends to invite a very vitriolic response from fascists. So I didn't really think it was fair to expose someone to that in the eyeball zone. So as per the protocol, I will do 2 next week. I don't feel comfortable putting other people at risk in that way. I mean, I don't know if there is a real risk. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but just indulge me in this one. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more videos every 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. If you'd like to see more videos from me, you can follow me on youtube.com/scaredycatstv, where I review horror movies, or youtube.com/megaslime entertainment zone, where I play video games. If you feel so inclined, you can also donate to my Patreon at patreon.com/thoughtslime. It helps me make videos like this, because this one's probably not getting monetized. You can also catch me streaming every week on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on YouTube and on Twitch. My advice to you, the listener, probably don't join any fascist street gangs. That's a bad idea. That's no good.